Most people think winning means being right, that if you have the last word, you've won the war. But the truth is, if you had to raise your voice to feel powerful, you were already losing. If your piece had to break for your point to land, you didn't win an argument, you lost yourself. Because the real game isn't about out-talking others, it's about outgrowing the need to. There is no victory in being loud if it costs you your dignity. There is no wisdom in being correct if it destroys the bridge between you and another soul. And there is no glory in proving someone wrong if it only proves how fragile your inner world still is. Control is a cheap substitute for true influence. And arguments? Arguments are where egos go to bleed in public. You want to start winning, then stop giving your piece away to every disagreement that knocks on your door. Stop auditioning for approval in debates where no one is listening. Stop mistaking defensiveness for clarity and anger for power. The loudest person in the room may win the moment, but the quiet one builds the future. And in that silence, something rare is born: mastery. The kind of mastery that doesn't need validation because it already has understanding. The kind that lets others rant while you watch with compassion, not because you're weak, but because you know the terrain they're stuck in. You've been there. You left. You stopped arguing with people who aren't even listening to themselves. You stopped explaining your truth to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped needing to be right because now you're committed to being free. There is something deeply exhausting about always needing to prove a point. It's not just the energy you burn, it's the dignity you leak. Every time you fight to be heard in a place that only values echo chambers, a small part of you forgets the sound of your own truth. You become reactive, not responsive, defensive, not discerning. You start confusing being loud with being clear, but clarity never has to shout, truth never has to argue, and peace never has to plead. The most dangerous wars are the ones you fight inside conversations that were never meant to hold your growth. When you argue with someone who only wants to win, not understand, you both lose. Because that kind of debate doesn't sharpen the mind, it bruises the spirit. And over time, if you stay in that cycle long enough, you don't just fight others, you start fighting yourself. You start doubting your own instincts. You rehearse comebacks in your mind instead of rehearsing compassion in your heart. You live to respond, not to reflect. And slowly, you forget that silence was once your power. People argue because they fear irrelevance. They shout because they think being loud will make their words land. But no one listens when they feel attacked. No one grows when they feel cornered. And no one opens when they feel judged. You cannot force someone to awaken by making them feel small. The moment you try to win someone over by dominating, you've already lost them. Because the heart never bows to arrogance. It only opens in the presence of genuine understanding. So you learn to stop. Not because you're weak, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally strong enough to walk away from what doesn't feed your spirit. You learn to listen, not to respond, but to understand who's really speaking. Is it the person in front of you or the wounds behind their words? You begin to recognize when someone is arguing with you, but really fighting a ghost from their past. And you no longer volunteer to be the battlefield for their unhealed trauma. That is when you start winning. When you stop trying to outtalk the pain and instead outgrow the game. You shift from reaction to response, from debate to discernment, from ego to empathy. And that shift, it's not loud, it's not flashy, but it changes everything. Because now you can walk into a storm and not become it. You can hold space for someone's anger without letting it infect your peace. You can disagree with elegance. You can disarm with kindness. You can lead without a voice raised, without a pulse racing, without a mask worn. This is not the kind of power the world teaches. This is the power of presence. It's the kind of power that makes others feel safe even when they don't agree with you. It's the power that turns silence into wisdom, that turns restraint into influence. It's the kind of power that rewires rooms without saying a word, and it's rare. Rare. Because most people are still arguing to be seen, still shouting to feel significant, still fighting to cover the ache of being unheard for too long. But not you. Not anymore. Because you've tasted something richer than being right. You've tasted the freedom of not needing to prove anything. You've learned that some people only love the sound of their own voice, and it's not your job to turn down their volume. It's your job to turn up your clarity. Some people only speak to feel dominant, not to feel close. You don't need to match their energy. You need to protect your peace. When someone throws you bait, let it fall to the floor. When someone distorts your words, stay calm. When someone comes with fire, carry water in your tone. Let the moment pass through you. When someone raises their voice, don't feel the need to match their tone. Instead, stay calm. That's where your strength lies, not in saying more, but in knowing when to say less. People are more likely to listen when you don't try to win the argument, but win their respect. Peace is not what you seek, it's what you protect. There comes a moment in your life when you realize that not every hill is worth dying on, not every opinion deserves a rebuttal, and not every challenge is a call to war. You stop stepping into every battlefield because you've come to understand that peace is the sharpest weapon in a world addicted to noise. The more you grow, the less you need to fight. The more you know yourself, the less you need to defend that knowing. Silence becomes your response, not out of passivity, but out of deep, inner conviction that your truth does not need an audience to exist. Arguments become dust when you realize your energy is currency, and you've wasted too much of it paying for moments that never gave you anything back. You walk away not to escape, but to rise. You disengage not to surrender, but to protect your mind from becoming a mirror of chaos. And those who try to pull you back into the fight will call it arrogance. They will call it weakness. They will call it indifference, but only because your calm has become their discomfort. You used to explain yourself to be understood. Now you express yourself only where you are respected. You used to break yourself down trying to win approval. Now you build your boundaries, so nothing breaks you at all. That is power. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that feels like walking into a room and knowing you don't need to perform for anyone. You are no longer proving anything. You are living it. And that shift from reaction to presence, from noise to wisdom, that is when you stop arguing and start winning. You begin to understand that the real flex is emotional discipline, not verbal dominance. The real strength is walking away from provocation without letting it leave a fingerprint on your spirit. Because every time you argue with someone who has no intention of growing, you shrink to meet them where they are. And shrinking is expensive. It costs you clarity. It costs you energy. It costs you self-respect. Some people don't want dialogue. They want dominance. They want to pull you into their storm and call it a conversation. But you're no longer available for chaos disguised as connection. You've outgrown the need to win battles that don't win you peace. And now, you show up differently. You listen, not to respond, but to understand. You speak, not to impress, but to express. You pause, not out of hesitation, but out of mastery. Because the person who can pause in the heat of conflict is the one who owns the fire. You learn that silence isn't retreat, it's control. It's saying, I'm not going to be who I used to be, just because you're being who you've always been. You no longer argue to be seen. You walk as someone who has already seen everything they need to see. The need to fight fades when your presence becomes enough, when your eyes say more than your voice ever could, when your stillness becomes louder than their shouting. You are not here to change every mind. You are here to protect your mental palace from becoming an open market where anyone can sell you their drama. The old version of you would have taken every bait, but now you know the difference between being heard and being drained, between being respected and being used, between standing your ground and getting stuck in mud. And in that knowing, you start winning in ways most people will never understand. You don't need to clap back to prove you're awake. You don't need to match their volume to validate your truth. You don't need to raise your voice when you've already raised your standards. That's the shift. The shift from craving validation to choosing peace, from proving your worth to simply embodying it. When someone tries to pull you into an argument, you no longer see an opponent, you see an echo of who you used to be, of what you used to tolerate, of the chaos you've already outlived. And so, instead of reacting, you breathe. You breathe because your breath is your return. You breathe because oxygen is power when the world tries to suffocate your presence with noise. You breathe and remember, no one wins by being louder, they win by being wiser. You don't need to respond to every opinion you hear. In fact, the smartest people know when to listen and when to stay silent. Not every misunderstanding needs correcting. Often, by staying calm and respectful, you do more to earn trust than any argument ever could. You owe no one your energy, especially when your peace is what they're trying to steal, and the ones who confuse your stillness for weakness. They're not ready for the weight of your restraint, because true power isn't in how much you say, it's in how little you need to say. And when your silence makes more noise than their shouting, that's when they start to feel it, not your anger, but your evolution. Your absence from the game they're still playing. Your refusal to dance for the validation you no longer crave. So stop explaining your boundaries. Start honoring them. Stop arguing over your truth. Start living it so loudly, it no longer needs defense. You were not made to win verbal battles. You were made to master your internal kingdom. And once you've done that, no one on the outside can pull you into their storm again. Because when you remain calm under pressure, people notice. You don't have to prove anything with big words or bold gestures. Your steady presence earns trust, and trust is the foundation of real influence. They don't need to prove they're right, because they've built their life in a way that speaks louder than their words ever could. People who are truly confident don't argue to be right. They stay focused on what matters, and they don't seek attention, they seek harmony. That's the kind of strength others respect most. When your inner world is stable, the noise outside loses its grip. You stop fearing misunderstanding, because you understand yourself so clearly that others' confusion no longer creates your chaos. You don't need the world to agree with you. You just need to walk your path with clarity. That's the real revolution. When someone comes with drama, you come with detachment. When someone tries to bait you, you stay anchored. You don't flinch when provoked, because your validation no longer lives in external reactions. It lives in your stillness. There was a time you thought staying quiet meant giving up, but now you realize it's often the smartest move. Walking away isn't weakness. It's choosing your well-being over conflict that leads nowhere. Maybe you used to replay arguments in your mind, but now you think about how to set clear, respectful boundaries. That shift shows real growth, and people respond better to calm confidence than to clever comebacks. And it doesn't include defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. So stop lowering your frequency just to meet someone where they are. Stop entering wars that were designed to drain you, not grow you. Sometimes, saying nothing says everything. When you stay calm instead of getting angry, people remember that. Your peace can inspire others to handle situations better too. You are not here to argue. You are here to evolve. You are not here to win temporary debates. You are here to win your life back from the grip of noise. That's the real victory. The kind no one sees. The kind no one applauds. The kind that changes everything. Quietly, completely, permanently. And once you taste that kind of inner freedom, arguments feel like poverty, emotional poverty, spiritual poverty, a desperate grasp at control from those who have lost control of themselves. You see it clearly now how many people are just waiting for someone to validate their chaos. They don't want clarity. They want conflict. Because in conflict, they feel alive. In conflict, they feel important. But you've outgrown that. You no longer confuse noise for connection. You no longer think that being triggered means something real is happening. You know better. You've felt what it's like to lose yourself in the heat of defending something your soul never needed to fight for. And you promised yourself never again. You promised to protect your mind like sacred ground. You promised to never bleed for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. And so now, you live different. You walk into rooms with presence, not performance. You hold your posture, not your pride. You walk away, not to punish but to preserve. Because you finally understand, if someone truly wants to understand you, they won't make you fight to be seen. They'll meet you in your peace. They'll respond to your energy, not react to your silence. The right people feel your quiet, like a sermon. The wrong people resent it, like an insult. But you don't bend anymore. You don't shrink, just because someone else refuses to expand. You're not responsible for other people's baggage. Help when you can, but don't carry what isn't yours. Respect begins when you know your limits. And if they see your distance as arrogance, let them. If they mistake your peace for passivity, let them. Because you're not here to explain who you are. You're here to live who you are with dignity, with grace, and with a focus so sharp it cuts through every invitation to chaos like a blade of light. The more you detach, the more they try to provoke. And that's when you know you're no longer feeding the fire. You've become the calm that ends it. Because winning was never about the last word. It was never about cornering someone in debate, proving your point, or walking away triumphant in a battle of egos. Winning was always about what you didn't lose in the process. Your peace, your clarity, your self-respect, your direction. That's the victory. No argument can give. You and no person can take away. You've learned to walk through life like a mirror, reflecting, not absorbing, present, but not penetrated, aware, but not attached. Instead of reacting instantly, you take time to understand what's really being said both in words and in tone. That kind of awareness helps you respond wisely and avoid being pulled into unnecessary tension. They don't argue because they're too focused on alignment. They don't chase applause because they've chosen inner peace over outer performance. You've mastered the art of holding your center even when the room spins. And in that stillness, you win. You win influence without persuasion. You win respect without needing to demand it. You win loyalty from those who recognize real strength doesn't need volumate, needs vision. And now, you've stepped into yours. No longer the warrior for petty battles. No longer the echo of old arguments. No longer the prisoner of being misunderstood. You've become the architect of peace, the curator of self-respect, the quiet storm that cannot be provoked into a performance. You've stopped arguing, and now you've started winning. Silently, boldly, completely. You win not because you silenced others, but because you no longer needed to speak. You didn't win by arguing more. You won by rising above the need to argue. And that's a victory that lasts. This is what people don't understand about strength. It's not loud. It's not reactive. It's not on display. True strength is restraint. It's the refusal to turn every offense into a reaction. It's walking past the noise without letting it rearrange the furniture of your mind. The weak chase arguments. The strong chase alignment. You used to argue because you didn't trust your own value unless it was confirmed. But now, your value is rooted in the soil of your own becoming, and that root runs deep. It doesn't shake when someone questions your choices. It doesn't tremble when someone doubts your integrity. It stands, quietly, unapologetically, solid as truth. And the moment you realized you don't owe your peace to anyone's chaos, you were reborn. You were reborn into a new kind of power. The kind that doesn't get drained by misunderstanding. The kind that doesn't fall apart when misrepresented. The kind that watches storms pass without letting a single drop touch your inner sky. You won't always be understood, and that's all right. What matters most is being true to yourself. In a world full of noise, staying calm and steady is not weakness. It's a strength that sets you apart. That is the revolution, the quiet one, the one that requires no banners, no slogans, no victory lap, just presence, just clarity, just the refusal to shrink back into the noise you once called home. And when you reach this level of quiet mastery, people will test you, not because they see weakness, but because they feel the shift. They feel that you are no longer within reach of their usual tactics, that your emotions are not available for manipulation, that your identity is no longer tied to how they react to you. And so they poke, they prod, they provoke not to win, but to see if you'll regress. But you don't. You've made peace your permanent address. You don't send your energy to every invitation that comes wrapped in offense. You don't hand out your attention like candy to every insecure ego dressed as confidence. You've become deliberate, selective, calm. And in that calm, you become magnetic. Not because you say more, but because you say less. Not because you try harder, but because you try only where it matters. People often argue when they feel unseen or insecure. But once you understand yourself and grow confident in who you are, you stop needing to prove anything. Instead of arguing, you listen more, and others respect you for it. Now, you wear truth like a second skin, soft, unbothered, invincible. Arguments, they feel like echoes now, faint, hollow, irrelevant, because real power doesn't argue, it moves. Quietly, decisively, fully rooted in direction. And the world begins to notice. They feel it in the way you walk into a room and don't demand attention, but command it. In the way you listen without planning your rebuttal. In the way you walk away without a single word, and somehow say everything. You no longer chase respect. You embody it. You no longer seek influence. You radiate it. You no longer explain your worth. You live it so clearly that no one can mistake it, not even those who try to deny it. That is when you stop arguing. That is when you start winning, not on their battlefield, but in your own kingdom. And in your kingdom, the rules are different. Here, your time is currency, and you no longer spend it buying validation. Your silence is a boundary, not an absence. Your stillness is strategy, not surrender. You don't need to justify your calm to people who thrive on conflict. If someone only shows up to challenge you, maybe it's time to step back. Not every conversation helps us grow, and it's okay to choose the ones that do. You used to think love meant being available for every conversation, every explanation, every emotional outburst. Now you know love begins with self-respect, and sometimes The most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to walk away quietly and let them argue with the echo. Not every disagreement is worth your time. Sometimes it's wiser to walk away and focus your energy where it truly makes a difference on people who are ready to grow with you. Some are meant to see you from a distance and wonder how you got so far by doing so little. But it wasn't little. It was sacred. It was the work of restraint, the labor of inner discipline, the courage to not react when your old self would have exploded. That is the invisible victory, the triumph that doesn't trend, the success that doesn't shout, the growth that doesn't need a witness. And so you keep rising, wordless and sure. Life brings challenges, that's a given. But when you face them calmly, with confidence, people notice. You don't need to raise your voice to show strength. A calm presence often speaks louder than words ever could. Because when you've mastered your emotions, you've mastered the game, and those still playing, it will never understand why they can't provoke you, why their sharpest arrows melt in your presence, why their chaos drowns in your calm. They don't know that you've buried your ego in the soil of your becoming, that you've traded offense for observation, that you've chosen clarity over combat. And in doing so, you've become untouchable now by rising above them, but by sinking so deeply into yourself that no one can pull you out again. You grow not by reacting to every criticism, but by focusing on what really matters. You don't need to defend yourself in every situation. Your reputation will follow your behavior over time. By letting go of the compulsion to fix misperceptions, to correct the wrong narrator in someone else's story, because you know now, your life is your loudest rebuttal. Your discipline is your argument. Your energy is your signature. You don't need to shout when your silence echoes with the weight of self-ownership. You don't need to tell people you've changed. Your actions will speak for you. Real strength isn't about trying to impress others. It's about showing, day by day, that you can handle life with wisdom and calm. They don't beg to be understood. They make peace with being misread. And when someone comes to test that peace, they find nothing to grasp. No reactive hook. No emotional ransom. No part of you that still needs their recognition. Because you're done outsourcing your worth. You're done performing sanity in front of madness. You're done explaining your evolution to those committed to their own stagnation. Your presence is no longer up for negotiation. You walk in truth now, not just in words, but in posture, in tone, in exit. And when they throw their storms at you, expecting the old reaction, craving the familiar explosion, you give them stillness. Stillness so deep it reflects their own noise. Stillness so calm it reveals their chaos. Stillness so intentional it becomes sacred. This is your new strength, not louder, but clearer. Not harsher, but sharper. Not bigger, but truer. And every time you refuse to argue, you choose to ascend. Every time you walk away, you invest in your peace. Every time you remain grounded while the world shakes, you remind yourself that you are not here to win the war of words, but to win your freedom, quietly, consistently, completely. And freedom tastes different when you've earned it through silence, when it no longer smells like the smoke of burned bridges or the noise of conquered arguments, but like air, clean and undisturbed, inhaled without guilt. That's what people don't understand about walking away. It's not weakness. It's the final stage of wisdom. The wisdom to know that not everything broken needs to be rebuilt. Not every insult needs a rebuttal. Not every door needs to be re-entered just because someone is knocking with louder fists. You've realized that being right isn't always the most important thing. Being at peace with yourself is. And once you focus on doing what's right instead of proving it, others naturally respect you more. You've outgrown the need to be seen. You've finally seen yourself and that's enough. That's more than enough. Because when you carry inner stillness, you carry a power that rattles the insecure. It's why your silence feels like judgment to those who've only ever felt noticed through conflict. But you're not judging. You're just not engaging. And that's what confuses them. That's what disarms them. That's what liberates you. In the past, you might have tried too hard to please everyone. Now, you know how to set boundaries and protect your time and energy because that's how you stay focused and effective. You used to shrink your truth so others wouldn't feel small. Now you honor it without apology. You've learned the difference between avoiding conflict and building real peace. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is speak honestly. Step away so that the peace you keep is genuine, not just polite. That shift is everything. It's the end of performing, the end of explaining, the end of contorting your truth to fit into someone else's misunderstanding. You've come to value yourself more. You don't have to justify your worth in every conversation. When you act with integrity, your presence speaks for itself. And when people realize they can no longer provoke you, they panic. Because they've mistaken access for power. But power was never in your words, it was always in your discipline, in your choice not to enter the ring, in your refusal to make your soul bleed for a prize you don't respect. This is the true victory, the silent one, the one that changes everything without saying a word. Because true confidence isn't about showing off, it's about being comfortable in your own skin. You don't have to prove your worth. When you know who you are, people notice and they respond to that quiet strength. When your energy speaks before your mouth does, and your silence is not empty, it is full of choices, full of boundaries, full of strength that does not beg to be seen. You've learned that you don't have to explain your every change to everyone. If someone remembers the old you and struggles to accept your growth, that's okay. Focus on being your best self. Over time, your actions will speak louder than any explanation. And the moment you stopped arguing, you stopped living in reaction to the world. You began living in response to your vision. You've learned to follow your own values, not the noise around you. When your inner peace guides your choices, you make better decisions, and people trust you more. There was a time when other people's opinions shook your confidence. But now, you stand firm because you've built your thinking on clear values and self-understanding. That's what real confidence looks like. And the people who can't reach you anymore, that's not abandonment. That's alignment. You didn't leave them behind. You just stopped lowering your frequency to reach them. Because you finally understood, arguing is the language of the uncentered, but presence is the language of the mastered. Today, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You earn respect by how you treat people. Winning hearts is far more lasting than winning arguments. Quietly, fully, irrevocably. Because the soul recognizes what the ego cannot. The soul recognizes someone who has stopped needing the external world to affirm an internal truth. And that's what you've become, a force. Not because you conquered them, but because you mastered yourself. Not because you silenced others, but because you no longer needed their noise to hear your own voice. That's the real win, not in out-talking someone, but in building better relationships and becoming someone others trust. That's not the end of the conversation. It's the start of real influence.